just to level set, this is a talk about OCSF, Security Lake, and Splunk. If you are in the wrong spot, I will wait a few minutes for you to get up and be embarrassed and leave. But otherwise, that's what we're going to talk about for the next, I want to say half hour. There'll be plenty of time for questions, but if you guys, if you all do have questions while I'm talking, please raise your hand, ask the question, I'll repeat it, and hopefully be able to give you the answer. Any questions so far? Okay. I will level set that some of this, if you went to our user conference this summer in June or July, you may have seen some of this, but absolutely nothing has happened to Splunk in the past 6 months, so don't worry, right? We're still here. My name is Tom. They took my contact information off of this slide for some reason, but my name is Tom. I'm a principal security strategist. I've been at Splunk for almost 10 years, so I'm older at Splunk than most people's cars, I guess. I am, at this point, I think employee number 100 and some out of 8,000, so it's been a fun ride. It's been a lot of fun. I've seen a lot of things. I've done a lot of stuff. I started as an SE in New England. I live north of Boston, so I live in a little town called York, Maine. Don't worry, it's not next to Canada, although Maine is next to Canada. I'm very close to New Hampshire. I started as an SE doing just everything, cloud, Ollie, we didn't have Ollie back then, but IT ops, security. I kind of turned into a security nerd while I was here, became a strategist, and got amped up on something called Boss of the SOC. Anyone ever played bots before? One person, 2 people. You guys see me after. I got something for you. Boss of the SOC is our blue team exercise, so every year we build systems up in AWS, actually. We put Splunk in the environment, we Splunk everything in the environment, and then we just attack it with row exploits. We image that, spin it up as AMIs, and have about 15 to 20,000 people a year play that game, mostly at Conf, so this year we had 600. It's a lot of fun. If you get a chance to play, go ahead and play. What I say is AWS is my side gig. I kind of dabble in a lot of things, but AWS is certainly one of them. And like everyone else you probably talked to this week, I've worked at Symantec and other security companies, so Core Security, Mimecast, and Raytheon. The old Raytheon, not the new Raytheon. Back in the 90s, Raytheon. All right. Quick agenda. What is OCSF? What is Security Lake? How do we play with Security Lake? What do we do? What do we don't do? What are we going to do? And then the people who reviewed my slide deck really didn't know what to title this last thing, so they just put other things. There's a hodgepodge of information that I'm going to throw at you, and if you have questions, please feel free to ask. So, OCSF. Lots of Splunk customers in here. How many of you have ever heard of the Common Information Model? Fewer. All right. So the Common Information Model, or CIM, is what we use, or what we introduced as a company to normalize data for enterprise security, which is also a CIM. So that's 2 CIMs. SIM and SIM. Now, at one point, we introduced Splunk infrastructure monitoring, and we called that SIM. SIM. See what I'm trying to get you guys involved. Come on, I know it's after lunch, I'm sorry. So, how many out there say, if you know what SIM is, how many of you can say that the data that you're ingesting into Splunk absolutely 100% maps to SIM? Head shake, no hands raised. That's what we expect, right? How about all of that data? Forget security relevant data, but all of the data that you're bringing into Splunk. SIM compliant? No. So for the last 10 years, I've spent my life trying to get customers to adopt SIM. And now I'm here talking to you about OCSF. What does that mean? Well, we've been somewhat successful. Unfortunately, I've never actually seen a customer with 100% SIM mapped data. We actually have a tool that will tell you if you are SIM compliant. The most I've ever seen is 76%. So no one customer that I've ever talked to, and I'm sure that there might be some out there, but none of the customers I've ever talked to have been completely SIM compliant. Does that remind anyone of Ceph? I got a chuckle. Someone shaking their head, yes? Thank you. See, interaction, it's fun, right? So SIM is unfortunately not without its problems, which we're gonna talk about, but Jesus. I wanna say a couple years ago, some product managers came over from Symantec, who I actually worked with 20 years ago, and they had something called the Integrated Cyber Defense Schema that they had been working on since that time. And when I tell you they've been working on it since that time, I remember seeing it 20 years ago in the same format. It was just different, right? It was different concepts, different ideas, but the core of it was still there. So we took that, and around the same time, Amazon came to us and started talking to us about Security Lake, Data Lake. So we combined the two. One's called OCSF, and Amazon called Security Data Lake, right? Or Security Lake. We published the first version, and when I say we, I'm gonna get into that. It's not just Splunk, but we published the first version of an open standard, and we'll talk about what that means and how that is defined as open, right? Who can contribute to it, who has control over it. The last thing we wanted was for this to become another Ceph, where whether it's 2 years from now or 10 years from now, everybody has to pay millions of dollars to migrate off of ArcSight to something else. That's the last thing we wanted. So we launched this at Black Hat last year, and Amazon launched Security Lake at reInvent last year. Everyone remembers that, right? If you were here. Awesome. So since launch time, we've had over 150 different vendors hop into the OCSF framework. And that can mean a number of different things. We'll talk about what that means in a second. So what are some cool things about OCSF? Well, first bullet, like I just said, it's not owned by anyone. So that means no one can tell you what you do with it. It's not vendor specific, right? It's quite the opposite. Even though we created it along with AWS and Symantec/Broadcom, anyone can use it and anyone can extend it. So it's not locked in. It doesn't have to be what we define it as. Not like Google, UDM, not like Microsoft, ASIM, not like Ceph, not even like SIM, right? SIM is locked in. If you are a Splunk customer and you're familiar with SIM, it is locked. You can't change it. You have to force your data into that model. If you as a customer or vendor can't find the right category, you can actually fork it and extend it to yourself. So you can actually create your own base of OCSF if you want, that adheres to the common standards. So that's something that has never happened, right? Now when I give this talk, when I've given this talk in the past, someone always points out the XKCD, I think that's right, it's a comic, what is it? Do you know which comic I'm talking about, where it's like, hey, we have 7 open standards, a new standard. Hey, we have 8 new standards, right? Like there's that question of, is this just going to turn into another closed standard that no one can create or augment? And that's not the goal. The goal is to have it completely open. It's in the name, right? Open cybersecurity framework. And we're trying to, as you look at it, it doesn't make sense to map some of this stuff to MITRE, but there are other frameworks that it works with. We've started to map some of it to Defend. There are some mappings to MITRE, but it's if you think about it, it's different content, it's different data. So it doesn't really make sense to map everything in OCSF to MITRE or vice versa. So this is, unlike SIM, easier to share data across all systems. Activity class, for instance, the system activity class in OCSF might get information from the malware class. It's sharing information between the two classes or the multiple classes in OCSF. That's not something that anything has ever done before, as far as I know. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not just Splunk and OCSF or AWS that supports OCSF. There's 150 different customers. Now, these are just some of them. I'm sure that more have added in the past month since I had to lock this slide deck. But these are some of the bigger ones, right? Palo, Comcast, Cisco, CrowdStrike, obviously Splunk, AWS. Are those names that you're familiar with? I hope. I would think so. Like, what has been, I don't know, I'll toss it out to you. What has been kind of the buzz about OCSF on the floor? Is there a buzz about OCSF on the floor? Has anyone talked about it? Head shakes. Okay. Are people talking about Security Lake? Yeah, nods, okay. So the other thing to mention here, there's two more things on this slide. One is that even though these customers have kind of, what I'll say, dipped their toe into OCSF, they haven't fully committed. So if you talk to one of your vendors who's on this list, Zscaler, for instance, Okta, they have bits of their software that is OCSF compliant. So they're kind of testing the water. They're just kind of seeing if people are going to adopt this or not, from what I can tell. The more customers or more vendors that adopt it, obviously, is the better. But from what I can tell, a lot of vendors are just kind of not taking a wait-and-see approach, but they're almost trying to determine if it's going to happen, almost. Does that make sense? When you have vendors or partners like AWS, Symantec, and Splunk behind something, you kind of have to assume that it's probably going to happen at some point. But that's kind of where we're at right now. A lot of vendors are just kind of testing it to see what happens. The other thing that is important on this slide is that validation. So for those of you who use SIM, Common Information Model at Splunk, did you know that if you have a field called source_IP, that you could put anything into it? It doesn't have to be an IP address. It could be a name. It could be a host name. It could be an address. Why would you do that? Obfuscate data, maybe? I don't know. But why would you do that? Anyways, validation is an important part of OCSF, which means if you have a field called IP address, guess what? It has to be an IP address. And it is regexed to test. Now, you could certainly still get around regex, obviously, but it's a little bit harder than just willy-nilly storing whatever you want in a field. So, begs the question, as a vendor of Splunk, who has thousands of customers on enterprise security using Common Information Model, Are we going to get rid of SIM? At some point, yes, right? But what I will say is that is years away, years and years and years away. The problem with that is that literally, the booth is falling apart, but literally, every customer who uses enterprise security requires SIM to operate correctly. So we can't just say, hey guys, enterprise security 8.0 came out today. We don't use SIM anymore. You got to reformat all your data to OCSF. That happened. A vendor did that. Do you remember ArcSight? Anyone who's been around for a while remembers ArcSight when they came out and said, you have to reformat everything. And oh, by the way, the upgrade is a rip and replace. It's not an in-place upgrade. Guess what happened? What do you think would happen? So this screenshot that you see here is an app that's available on Splunk Base now. It's an OCSF to SIM translator. So anything you bring in from OCSF, within reason, can be translated to SIM, again, within reason. So if you are bringing in data from Security Lake or other OCSF points, you can still convert that to SIM. Now, all that being said, we've actually started to develop our detections. Wrong button. We've actually started to develop some detections that we're releasing in OCSF format. And our new behavioral analytics product, not our old behavioral analytics product, our new one that will be launched on Splunk Cloud with enterprise security is developed 100% in OCSF. So we're committed to it. Our new products are using it, but our older products have to be retrofitted, if that makes sense. So normally I'd fire up a web browser, but I'm already crazy enough to do one demo later on. But this is, if you go to OCSF.io, I believe is the site, you can see everything that you want. It's completely open. We have a Slack group, 546 people last time I checked. Adding content, developing OCSF, contributing to it's not a product, but contributing to the project. Same screen. But as you start to drill down, you can drill down into different areas, different fields, things of that nature, right? So if you go to take a look at this, and I suggest you do, so some fields are required, some fields are optional. That's good, right? You don't have to bring everything in. And not every vendor stores everything. So, you know, if a source IP is required, that might be a bad example, but let's say if time zone was required, that might be a really good example. There's a lot of vendors that don't include that in their log data. So if you go to their website, I'm not going to read this to you, but there's a blurb about this long about what ASL is. I'm sorry, what Amazon Security Lake is. See, I just broke my own rule. The best way I like to describe Amazon Security Lake, and I have been in the room with the person who is like the VP of Amazon Security Lake, is that it's a bunch of S3 buckets fronted by services to get that data in. Now, that might be the cheapest 20-cent explanation of what it is, but at the end of the day, that's what it is, right? It allows you to store data in OCSF format on cheap disk and bring other vendor agnostic data into Amazon Security Lake. Ultimately, if you look over there, that's what they say it is. I like it. I think it's awesome. But at the end of the day, when I'm looking at it, it's a bunch of S3 buckets with services built around it. And this is the part that is important. This is the most important. But if you take anything away from this presentation, it's right here. Because, and it's not the circle with the arrow. Because without all of these partners, a security lake is nothing. Take out the bottom half of these two slides, what do you have? AWS, right? It's the partner sources, it's the analytic sources that really make Security Lake valuable. So what are some of the benefits of using Splunk with Security Lake? That's a great question, actually, I didn't ask. Any Splunk customers who are currently using Security Lake? One. Any more? Is your hand up, or are you just chilling out? All right. All right, so we have 1 out of 70 some odd. I'd like to talk to you afterwards if you don't mind, if you have the time. Okay. I personally have talked to hundreds of customers in the past 3 years, joint AWS and Splunk. And the one thing I hear, no matter what, and it usually comes from on-premises customers, is that getting AWS data into Splunk is insanely stupid and difficult. And I'm sorry about that. If you have an on-premises installation of Splunk and you've tried to get AWS data in, I apologize. I didn't actually create it. I didn't write the code, but I'm embarrassed by it. Has anyone tried to do that? Not a good time, right? Like, it's at least a bottle of whiskey. More than that? Okay. Maybe we should talk. With Security Lake, what I can tell you is once Security Lake is set up in AWS, it's a click of a button to get that data into Splunk. So it's not setting up queues, it's not setting up topics, it's not setting up cloud trails and CloudWatch logs and all, like, there's a list of 300 things that you have to do to get data into Splunk from AWS for on-premises customers. Cloud is different, but on-prem, completely different. But there are some other benefits, right? So that's one benefit. The other ones are up on the screen. I would say it helps customers meet compliance mandates, right? That's the number one thing that I've heard from a lot of customers is that I have to keep all of this data forever. I think in New York it's 7 years now, 4 years, 7 years. And I don't want to keep it indexable and searchable in Splunk. The other one, and we'll go into use cases in a little bit. The other one is I have a bucket load of VPC flow logs, and I want to search this IOC across all of them. And I don't want to blow out my Splunk license. Anyone ever run into that problem? You're already nodding your head before I even said it. Yeah, that is like the top thing that I've seen from customers. So let's switch a little bit and drop into where Splunk integrates with AWS Security Lake, and then we'll get to a demo, and then I'll fire it open for questions. So we released 7.0, I think it's 7.0.3 at this point. We released 7.0 at Conf this year in July. Where we're at right now is you tell us in AWS which data you want Splunk to index, and we will just grab it and index it and suck it in. Not too dissimilar to what our current offering is, right? But we're pulling it from the data lake. In the future, and I'm not going to commit to any timeframes, even if you come up and ask me after the session, we'll have something called federated search, which will allow you from Splunk with a command to search your security lake just as you would any other storage medium. So we currently have this for S3. We're going to introduce it for security lake. Ultimately, and I think if you've been a long-time Splunk customer, you've been through a lot of changes. You've noticed that our messaging has kind of changed from Splunk all the things, which was probably 5 or 6 years ago, to we want to analyze your data where it resides, not in Splunk. We don't want to be your storage medium, right? We want to be your analytics engine. And if you have data in Security Lake, that's great. If you have data in S3 buckets, that's great. If you have data in Hadoop, I'm sorry, but that's great. We don't care where your data resides. If you've been with Splunk for a very long time, you might remember something called Hunk. Splunk for Hadoop. We were doing this before I started, and I've been here 10 years. Hunk was something before I started. So analyzing data where it resides is not a new concept, right? It might be the new hotness if you walk out onto the expo floor, but it's certainly not a new concept. This is what the add-on looks like. I'm actually going to switch to a demo, but I wanted to give you a screenshot of it and have it in the talk track so that you could see it when you download it. The important part about this version, 7.0 plus, is that it will translate the Parquet format to JSON format when it's indexed. So everything is JSON when you search it, which is kind of cool. Like I said, I'll show you that in a second. So if we go here, which is the slide before, all the way back, when I said, what is Amazon Security Lake? It's the same diagram, blown up a little bit, and they let me put a new block down there with Splunk and AWS. So everything at this point comes through an SQSQ. Live demo. First and foremost, I'm going to go and show you the AWS app. If I can find it. Here it is. So when you set up a Security Lake integration, everyone who's seen this app before is hopefully familiar with this type of setup. Like I said, it takes hours if you do it the normal way. Security Lake, SQS-based, and that's it. You select your account, you select the region that you're in, you select the queue name, and go. You can change the source type if you want. I wouldn't recommend it, but yeah, once you set that up, you go. That's it. It starts sucking data in. Yes, sir? Yes. So the question is, do you have to set up the queues beforehand? The answer is yes. But instead of one queue per product that you're trying to ingest into Splunk, it's one queue. So you turn on Security Lake in AWS, right? It says, what do you want to bring in? You select a couple of boxes. You say, I want CloudTrail, CloudWatch, Security Hub, Guard Duty, VPC flow logs. That's what everyone's using it for. Come on. And then when you set up the queue, you can actually specify what you want Splunk to bring over. So I recommend not bringing over VPC flow logs if you're storing them in Security Lake. If you do, you might need to reach out to your rep for a license reset. But that's it. That's the extent of adding AWS data to Splunk through Security Lake. Did you have another question? Okay. So then I will go back to enterprise security. Now, I would just like to show you so that you can all see or take pictures, whatever you want to do. I just want to show you all what this actually looks like so that you can get a sense. Would help if something came back. This always happens. It's a live demo. I told you guys. I told everyone I didn't want to do it. Index. This is why I don't do live demos. Yeah. All right, let's just, please don't do what I'm about to do ever. Oh, and it still didn't come back. Oh, there it goes. All right. Yeah, you know, I joke about doing index equals star, and for those of you who were at the beginning when I mentioned I run bots, we actually analyze a lot of the searches that people run in bots, and it always starts with index equals star. So I have to think that somewhere out there somebody said, if you're using Splunk, always just do index equals star. All time, right? I mean, so this is what it looks like once you actually view the data, ingest it from Security Lake. It's all JSON, it's all coming in, very standard format. And if you wanted to look, here's what I was talking about earlier, product vendor name. So we have AWS and Okta data in here. Product version, product feature, and then product name. So very quickly you can start to, for those of you who have used Splunk before, you know what I'm going to say, you can very quickly start to iterate over data just by clicking a button and seeing which data you want. The other important thing to note here is, remember how I said don't bring in VPC flow logs? Do you see why? It's over 50% of my data from Security Lake, and this is just not even a day, it's an hour's worth of data. CloudTrail is also very chatty, but I also consider CloudTrail to be much more important than VPC flow logs, so. All right. Did that answer your question that you had? Okay. I'm gonna switch back, I think. Sweet. All right, quick wrap up. Use cases, what we've seen from our customers. So this is kind of the old way, AWS's way, and the new approach. So brute force SSH using CloudTrail and Security Hub. So the old way is that you would ingest CloudTrail and run detections against it. The AWS approach without Splunk is CloudTrail analyzed by GuardDuty, sent to Security Hub, Security Lake. Joint approach, Security Hub and CloudTrail send that data to Splunk, while remaining data can be stored in Security Lake. Detections fire on CloudTrail. You guys don't have to leave yet, I'm not done. Command and control against the EC2 instance, VPC flow and Security Hub. Again, ingest VPC and perform threat intel matching against IP addresses. That's going to blow out your license, guaranteed. VPCs are analyzed with AWS, GuardDuty, and findings are sent to Security Hub. Joint approach, VPC stored in Security Lake, customers run detections from Splunk against that data. Period. Suspicious IP caller, CloudTrail and Security Hub, also known as malicious IP callers. Ingest CloudTrail and perform threat intel matching against that IP address, very similar to the last one. Also similar to the last one, everything in Security Hub. Boom, down at the bottom, data can be stored in Security Lake, detections fired on CloudTrail. So these are just some of the use cases we're starting to see. Like I said, I feel like even though OCSF and Security Lake are now a year old, we're still in its infancy. Not a lot of vendors are all in on it yet, and I think they're just trying to see, are my customers asking for it? What are other vendors doing? Where's the person that asked about Microsoft disappeared? But those are valid questions, right? What happens if the bigger vendors don't jump on board? Time will tell. So where do we see things going to provide best outcomes? Analyze data that they did not have access to before, VPC flow, things of that nature. Analyze SaaS logs, all of that stuff coming in through App Fabric. And search data in Security Lake that is not currently stored in Splunk. Now, let me ask those of you who are still here, paying attention, would you ever want to run a ransomware detection against the S3 bucket? You're shaking your head no. Why? I'm pointing at you. You were shaking. Yeah. Didn't you shake your head no? Oh, sorry. You don't know? And? You're almost there. Anyone else want to toss an idea out there? So when you're dealing with a ransomware attack, things happen in milliseconds, right? How long does it take to search an S3 bucket? There's always going to be a need to have certain logs that you need real time, right? It's just a matter of fact. And that's where the partnership is brilliant. You know, house all of that, and I don't even want to say low value, but all of that high volume data that doesn't necessarily need to be searched every second or every day or every 10 minutes in Security Lake, and house all of that data that you have that rolling window of on faster disk. Since you're the one person that is a Splunk customer who has turned on Security Lake, I'd like to talk to you afterwards, Mr. MIT. Okay? If you do decide to turn this on, please talk with your account team. Get somewhat, it likely will be me if you're in AMER. It might be James Young if you're in APAC. But we'll come on and just kind of talk to you about use cases and how it works and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, watch the future for federated search at Splunk. Security Lake is definitely one thing we're looking at, but there's a lot of other stuff that is out there for federated search. And then chat with your Splunk team. Reach out to your rep, reach out to your SE. They're more than willing to help. And they'll bring one of us in. Thank you. And questions, I'll stay as long as I can.